Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast, where truth is the only currency that matters. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who continues to tune in every episode. And you have to know that your support and your emails and just listening for like 30 seconds helps to fuel all of the progress that we get here. This show would not exist without you, and I'm very grateful that you're here. So if you're new though, you need to help me out. You need to hit like and share this podcast with somebody who's ready to wake up, or maybe they've woken up, but they're just hungry for a different type of conversation. So you can find me on Instagram as well at Boundless Authenticity, and you can join our private community on facebook.com/groups/Boundless Authenticity. On this episode, I'm talking with Kara Goodwin, who is a spiritual guide, energy healer, and top-ranking podcast host who walked away from 15 plus years in the corporate grind to answer a higher calling. I would also like you to know that she's the author of Your Authentic Awakening, and it's a pretty comprehensive guide that blends her personal stories of awareness with practical tools that can help you do everything you need to do. Kara, how's it going?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy your podcast, and I'm so excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here. I'm very excited, actually. You have no idea. I mean, you've been doing this spiritual guide thing for a long time, right?
Yeah. So I started waking up back in 2016 sort of time, and then developed the podcast in 2018. And I've been working I kind of started as a meditation teacher and really focusing on just helping people to learn how to meditate, because meditation was so beneficial for me as my life collapsed in 2016. And so I was so passionate about sharing meditation, and that's really where everything started. But when I came to meditation, it was very much just as a coping mechanism, not really to start expanding myself spiritually, and not to start having metaphysical experiences. I didn't know what the quantum was. I didn't know any of that. I was a very mainstream person, and really just needed meditation to help me cope. And I even went on a retreat early on in my meditation journey, and I had this healer who offered to do a healing session on me. And I was like, well, I'm not sick. I'm interested in healing, but I'm not sick. Like, do you still want to do a healing session? She said, oh, you don't, it works on all levels, body, mind, and soul. And she did this like chakra healing. And when she got to my heart, she's like, you're not praying. You don't pray when you start your meditations. And we were in this it was a spiritual retreat, and I was in a spiritual class. There was no reason for her to think that I don't pray, because I was a good student. And that really said a lot, about it. That was absolutely true. I was really trying to keep the meditation and spirituality separate, and really just control my nervous system. And so eventually my meditation practice kind of started to become spiritual, and I started having interesting experiences that were unexplainable in terms of the material world. And then, now fast forward to almost a decade later, and I'm a spiritual guide. I love to help others to connect with their higher selves and to really embody the spirit that we are. And that was a very long way to answer your question. I've been around for a little while. That's the short answer.
Well, I didn't realize that we actually got started on the path around the same time then.
Is that right?
Yeah, I do remember bumping into something that you were talking on, and I can't remember the name of that network.
The Conscious Awakening Network.
Conscious Awakening Network, yeah. And that was my introduction to you. And I found you very authentic and very interesting because you come across as just a regular person. I know there's certain keywords that like you've used some of them like embody and all those things. And everybody that just kind of wants to get shit done is like, what the fuck does that even really mean? Right. Even though like, it should be pretty obvious, but there's just so many keywords that we tend to use that throw people off, and it's good because you're pretty straightforward with the way that you talk. And I loved that very much. So
thank you.
My question, I mean, personally, I always kind of wanted to ask you, like, when did you figure out enough was enough and that you kind of had to move on to a different level of being yourself? What was that moment like?
What a great question. I don't know that there was a specific moment. For me, it's been a rapid evolution, a rapid, I'll go back to that embodiment. It's kind of more and more of the true, the true spirit of who I am, on spirit, using that in many ways, that word, but the truth of who I am, I feel like it's been more of a shedding process. And even though I feel like it has been rapid, because 10 years really, that's really not that long. And 10 years ago, I was a totally different person. And there have been different iterations, almost like different gateways that, you expand a little bit more, you kind of start to accept a little bit more, you start to understand a little bit more. And it's never, at least for me, I come across a lot because like you, I'm interviewing a lot of people, reading a lot of books. I love like this. I'm so interested in these topics that I love to immerse myself in them. So over the years, I've come across a lot of different teachings, a lot of different ways that they explain consciousness and the spirit world, and a lot of conspiracies, that like I was not I didn't even really believe in aliens until probably about 5 years ago. And which is really funny. Like I just hosted a galactic summit like last month, and and I'm very galactically and cosmically oriented now, but I, in so many ways, I feel like we get introduced to things and we're not always ready to accept them, to understand them. I'm curious if you had this experience along the way too, where like somebody is having a conversation and maybe they're using words like you were just referring to, that maybe they're using embodiment, maybe they're using quantum, or we don't understand really what vibration is or whatever it might be, or they're talking about Arcturus, and these words that like when you're in the mainstream, they don't mean anything or they mean something different. And you start to hear these things that you've never heard before. And I know for me, sometimes I just had to have the seed planted because my awareness was either like, I have no idea what they're talking about. This sounds like gibberish. Or two, I do understand what they're talking about and they're crazy. I don't accept what they're saying. This is fantasy or whatever, we might think. Or three, sometimes, okay, that does make sense. And I can roll with that and learn more about that or whatever it might be. But oftentimes, I would come up against something and either not really understand it or not be ready to accept it. For me, like with a lot of conspiracy theories, and I think a lot of people are like this, they sound crazy and people call them crazy, and it takes, there's an initial rejection of it. Like, oh, That's, my triggers are up and that can't be, I can't, the world wouldn't work that way. People wouldn't do that to each other. And so I've definitely been there where I didn't even want to look at it because I just thought it was a waste of time. And then it's like a little bit of it starts to make sense. And then a little bit more comes in and it ties to something that you do know is true. And it's so some people come at it from like a medical perspective where they have like a medical issue and then they start to see like, wait a second, this isn't working. And so it opens up a door and they start to go down. So, they start to learn some things and they learn about like what's actually happening in pharma, what's actually happening in hospitals and in the government and so forth. But things start to connect that don't have to do with healthcare. But it's like, wait a minute, now we're looking at this other thing that is, it fits in, like it has the same sort of narrative or it's like underlying current to it. So my answer to your original question is really just that there was that time in 2016 where my life I had my sister-in-law died. She took her life and she was one of my best friends as well. And then 3 weeks later, our dog died. A few weeks after that, my stepdad his health was deteriorating rapidly and he had surgery on his brainstem. And then shortly after that, my mother-in-law was hit by a motorbike when she crossed the street. So she was in the hospital and recovering from that. And then my stepmom ended up in the ICU with a failing heart. And the only thing that saved her was a heart transplant. She was so sick that she went straight to the top of the heart transplant. All of that happened in 7 months. All of that happened from start to finish in 7 months. I was so disoriented. And, I didn't understand what was happening. And so that's why I came to meditation. So that was a big watershed moment for me in terms of, okay, I need something different. Like I can't keep coasting the way that I had been coasting on the surface of life was like not helping me in that panic state of just one thing on top of the other and not able to even grasp what's happening before I get the next hit of terrible news. So, but in terms of kind of walking away from everything, that's been gradual. And my husband is amazing, but he's still, and he's curious, but he's definitely not like, he doesn't, go really deep into consciousness. He's just not really interested in it. But that really kind of gives me grounding, and it kind of keeps me, I think that in a way it pumps the brakes on me, because I almost have like the red face test with my husband where it's like, okay, can I like digest this enough that I could explain it to somebody like my husband, who's not a naysayer, but just not, he's not going to accept just anything. So I think that also has kept me from having one big moment where I'm like, I'm done. And from now on, I reject the matrix,
Oh, I had to take a moment to laugh at that. First of all, if you're calling it the Matrix, you're not free from the Matrix. Secondly, it sounds like you are a part of a group of us that woke up around that time and we were very spiritually available. And so the way that we progressed was much faster. It was a lot of stuff all at once. It really put us through the strainer because we were ready to do the work and get on with applying that and helping people. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I agree, because it was that pre-COVID, and we have had a huge wave of people from COVID onwards who their whole reality has shifted. And so I agree with you. I think that there was a pre-COVID wave that came through so that things could start to be in place. Like there were, people have friends that were already, questioning things. There were podcasts that were out. There were, a lot of people woke up in that same sort of time frame. And then there was also like the 2010 to 2012, like the whole Mayan calendar. Like that was another, I feel like spike or like group that kind of came in together. And it is fascinating, the big grand design of it and how we all work together kind of unknowingly behind the scenes, right?
Yeah. I'm listening to you talk and I don't have Chat GPT to tell me all of my questions. So I'm thinking, where do I take this in the best way that can highlight what you have to say? And I think obviously based on what you've just said is you had all of this happen in a 7-month period. It really put you through the ringer. And when things like that happen, you enter crisis. And crisis is really just a conflict between your former self and who you need to become. So how did you reconcile with your former identity as you transitioned from that to this?
What a profound question. There are so many different ways that can come through, and I think on any given day or any given moment, I'm sure it was very fluid in terms of there's still things even now, if I look back and I think of what I was teaching, 8 years ago, how I would teach, how stringent and how much importance I would put on your posture when you're meditating or whatever. There are things like that where that version of me, I cringe at, where it's like, or the righteous, like there is one way to meditate and people call swimming can be meditation, but that's not true. You have to be sitting still and you've got to still the body and the mind, and all of this kind of dogmatic way that I had been taught. And then, as I evolve as a person, it's like, actually, that's really valid. There are ways that we can move through our day in a meditative state. And I still think that it does help to go back to like a traditional meditation where you're quiet. But so there's always that kind of like, what I didn't know back then and what I know now. But there's also, 2025 for me has been a big shadow year, a big year thematically of the shadow rising. And a big part of that in my personal life has been memories coming back to me and things that I'd completely forgotten about. And they come and they're hurtful things, they're hard things to look at. They were, traumatic things. And I don't mean huge T like MK Ultra type. Oh, that's another one I listened to of yours was that the MK Ultra guy. But so these are like little T traumas, like teenage exclusion, embarrassment, shaming, that kind of thing, which is really hard to go through, but it's not, it's not big T trauma. But anyway, so I have had these things kind of, from my perspective, from like human Kara perspective, they've come about spontaneously where I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? And how have I forgotten that for 30 years? And part of the process of the shadow is the acceptance. And so whether we're talking about the shadow or whether we're talking about integrating the pre-awakened self and the beliefs that we had when we were living a mainstream life and we didn't, we couldn't see the true reality, or we didn't appreciate what people were saying, we dismissed them. I think the biggest opportunity and what I strive for is the acceptance of of all the versions of myself and the way that they have served me, and the divine design of my life. And that even if there are things, that maybe when I look back, I would cringe, I could cringe at, like, what were you thinking, Kara? But it does seem that there is this beautiful divine design to our life that's really hard for our human brains to understand as we're going through it, that maybe we can have the cognizance to go back and reflect on and see, wow, the fact that I was at this stage when this happened was so poignant and really helped to set me up for the next thing. But it's real, we can't really see that as we're going through it. So I think above all that's my aim, is that acceptance. And then that is also that integrating, because from an energy perspective, when we consider that we are all energy, and that really is the foundation of who we are, when we have these parts of ourselves that we don't accept, that we reject for whatever reason, because we're afraid of them, or because we're embarrassed by them, or because we feel that we're naive, or whatever it might be, that energy gets frozen because we're not willing to bring it in and let it be part of who we are. So through this year of 2025 and all the opportunities that have shown up with this, like, again, spontaneous kind of shadow work, that's just these parts of myself that show up unexpectedly. And they're like, hey, remember me? Remember when we went through this? And my knee-jerk reaction is like, don't look at that. I don't know where that memory came from, but it was fine when I wasn't thinking about it. and then I catch myself and I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening here? Let me actually look at this. Let me actually remember this. Let me see it now from my perspective and soften it. And then it helps that energy to be able to move and to integrate. And I've had some metaphysical experiences like that where, I mean, actually the very first one of this year was kind of that in-between state between sleep, like before you fall asleep, but you're still, that hypnagogic state, if anybody's familiar with that. So I was having this kind of mystical experience where I'm seeing like patterns, I'm seeing colors and moving geometries. That's kind of how I see these things a lot of times when I have that inner sight. I don't typically see like form in terms of like, I don't really see beings. I don't really see landscapes. I see these geometrical patterns, and they're dynamic and they're moving. And sometimes I'll see like the movement like a toroidal field. So I have the sense that there is like a being there, but I can't see the being. I can only see the torus and the energy flow. But anyway, so I was kind of having this blissful, neutral experience, pleasant experience in the metaphysical realm, the quantum realm. And then all of a sudden, that memory that I mentioned before of being a teenager, and that this exclusion and this like kind of isolation and that experience that I had came out of nowhere. And I was stunned that I had forgotten this, because for a teenager, it was a big deal, and I'm like, how did I forget this for all these decades? And but like I said, my knee-jerk reaction, my subconscious reaction that I actually caught myself doing was, nope. You go back where you came from. I'm enjoying what's happening right now, and I don't want to spoil it. And I know, like, I knew enough that there was hurt there was pain there, and I was like, no, I'm blissed out. This is fun. I don't want to hurt. And then, like I said, I caught that, and I decided to take a different avenue with it. But I have had these things show up in that sort of way, and then had in the physical realm, in my waking realm, had physical things that happen that tell me that what I think I'm doing in the quantum is actually happening. Because your quantum experiences, the metaphysical realms, they're not physical. They're happening in, well, at least for me. Let me just say it this way, because I'm sure everybody has their own unique experiences. So I'm not saying across the board that it's like this, but for me, I will, like this, let's just talk about this one experience. I felt that I had the opportunity to bring that memory in and to kind of comfort it and to learn from it, to go back to it, to feel what I felt, and to not be afraid of how it made me feel, and to try to see it from more perspectives. And then it carried on in the days afterwards. It carried on. It was like forefront of my consciousness. It was forefront of my awareness. It kept kind of creeping in as the days would go on. I was having conversations with select friends to say, oh my God, I had this memory come up. And then there was a book that I had been given for Christmas. And I had not asked for this book. It was on internal family systems, which is are you familiar with that? Yeah. So, a friend had given it to me. I didn't know. I thought I knew what IFS was, but what I thought it was ended up being something different. And the night after this happened, I had finished a book and I was holding that book to be my next one, because I got a whole bunch of books for Christmas. And so this was in February. And finally, I just randomly, quote unquote, randomly picked this book up. And I was holding it open in my lap, but there was a lot of chaos happening in my house at the time. My kids were busy doing this project, and there were people coming in and out of my house, and I kept getting distracted. So I never actually got to start the book. I was just holding it open. And then I go to coffee the next morning with a friend, and I'm sharing with her about the experience that I had, in the quantum, and how that memory came up, and I caught myself not wanting to deal with it and everything, and then realized, like, wait, actually something's here for me. And she goes, oh, it reminds me of IFS, internal family systems. And I was like, what'd you say? And she's like, it sounds like internal family systems. Have you heard of it? And I said, I almost started reading a book about it last night, but I don't know what it is, and so tell me about it. So she told me about it. And so then I go dive into this book, and I'm kind of looking at internal family systems in the context of this memory that I had, and the protective parts of me that were kicking in, to try to kind of shield me from it. And then, looking at all sides of it and everything. Well, one of the people who was involved in this encounter, this experience that I had, that the memory was based on, messaged me on Facebook like 2 days after, like while I'm going through all this, but it was like 2 days after the memory showed up. And the whole time when I'm like trying to process all of this, and I'm deep in it, and I feel that I'm working internally within myself to integrate it and to release things and to keep it from, freezing again. And I don't really go on Facebook. I have a Facebook account, and some of my Instagram things will flow automatically to Facebook, but I don't get notified unless my phone is already unlocked and I'm already on my phone. That's the only way that I'll see if somebody posts something on Facebook, is because I have all the alerts turned off, and I'm not active on there. So people don't tend to post stuff anyway, because it's not the place to reach me. I don't see it. So I don't get a lot of action. And I just so happened to be on my phone, and it was like Mary Smith, we'll just make it up. Mary Smith just posted on your Facebook wall. And I was like, of all the people who possibly could have posted on my wall, and the timing that I would ever even see it, because when I do go into Facebook, I will see that there are lots of things that I've missed. And people have posted like memories or tagged me in something, and I've totally missed it for like months. And it was that specific person who, who was really the one who had created that little T trauma for me. And that I was actively working on forgiving and all of this. So that is fascinating to me. Like these ways that with the timing, the specific timing, and how we get these verifications of things that are happening in what we could explain away as our imagination. And it's like, wow, there's so much available in verification that helps to come in to say like, okay, this is multidimensional. It's happening in a lot of places. And here's your 3D verification of it,
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So maybe I should share this with you. You're probably the perfect person to share this with. What you were just describing, I just call those imprints, not because I've read it anywhere or anything, although I've come across it references that elsewhere. But to me, it's really just like those memories that you have. It's like, this is your prefrontal cortex and somebody just put a stamp on it, and just pull the stamp away, and it left this thing in your mind's eye that is like, look at me. And when I tell people what I do, they're thinking that I'm just, swinging a watch and saying you're getting very sleepy and some other variation of garbage that they saw on television. And that's really not it. And I say to people all the time, like, if you had any idea how many people just actually straight up lose their minds because of this phenomenon and they don't know how to deal with it, and nobody in their immediate circle has ever talked about it happening, so they don't know that it's normal, right? And they just nope it away into oblivion, and it creates this thing that just like pushing a snowball down a hill. And then that's it. One day it hits you in a different form and everything's not okay. And I wish that more people actually knew that that's all it was, and that the mind just has a limited number of tricks. And if you don't get wise to them, then you're going to suffer unnecessarily, right? And it's actually not, your head should never be a threatening environment to be in. And that's what meditation is so wonderful for. And that's why I'm grateful that people like you exist, because you're teaching this stuff authentically and simply. So my next question would be, what are the basic things that people should be doing in meditation in order to maximize the experience? Because not everybody has 20 minutes every morning or 20 minutes before bed. Some people only have 5.
Yes. Yeah. Such a great question. One is breath work. Breath work is really such a way to hack into the nervous system, and our nervous system is so intricately connected to the mind. And so if we can actively calm our nervous system every day, it does help to discharge the buildup, which relates to those imprints that you were talking about. I love that. And clear some of that out, because we store it within the body. We store these memories, we store the pain, we store the emotions in the body if we're not able to process them. And the nervous, like having, doing work with the nervous system can help so much. So, doing breath work, I highly recommend. And it also is so good for you physically. This is another thing that I feel like people don't know as much, but that your physical health can improve so much with things like meditation. I used to get chronic sinus infections, once the weather would change, I would always catch a cold, a respiratory illness, and it took me forever to get over it. And I would, often have one right into another. Coughing, I would have coughing fits that would just last for weeks. And I would get them in the summer as well, where I'm like, I can't believe I remember so many times I'd be like on some summer holiday and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I have a sinus infection in the summer. But I hardly ever even get colds anymore. And that used to just be an ongoing thing. And I was on antibiotics a lot. And now, maybe I might get a little whisper of a cold for a few days every once in a while, but I never have to go on antibiotics or anything. So, and I attribute a lot of that to the breath work because I'm exercising my lungs. And although it's not really even about the exercise, it's not just the exercise, because I used to be a very avid runner and I still got sick all the time. So, and that was a lot more physical exercise than the breath work. But you could do a breathwork practice where, there's a guy called Wim Hof, not a great character, apparently. Like he's had some things that have come out in the public, where you might not want to follow him as like your role model for all aspects of life. But he's got a very effective breath work that you can learn. And he has an app that you can use to help you get used to the breath work. But that type of thing can be really, really helpful. And then watching the breath, just taking some deep breaths down, like feeling the breath going past your belly button, like lower than your belly button, feeling the belly inflate with a slow breath, and then feeling the belly relax back as you exhale. And just trying to keep your attention with that flow of breath, letting the breath be deep, letting it be slow. And the impact of that, even if you're just doing those couple of things for 5 minutes, I would place a good bet that you will want to do it longer as you build up the practice. But 5 minutes, if you're just starting, 5 minutes is great. Maybe even 3 minutes, because sometimes I was like this, oh, I'm a meditator now, I'm going to sit down for half an hour and meditate. And that was a terrible idea because my mind was going everywhere and it was painful. And there were a lot of reasons I should have built it up. So yes. And for me, I talked about how my meditation practice started very secularly. I wasn't interested in the spiritual aspect. I know with the work that you're doing on your show that the people listening are very likely wanting to connect with things beyond the veil, with their higher self, to connect with their soul. And in that case, I would highly recommend starting your meditation with the intention that you are connecting with your own higher self, with God, with your divine team. I definitely recommend that. Again, that cumulative effect of keeping that relationship alive and in your awareness is hugely beneficial. And the other thing is that as you're relaxing and you're going more into a surrender mode with meditation, you do want to have the intention of, okay, this is who's welcome here. And because as you get into that relaxed state, if you're not being intentional about what sort of energies can interact with you, then you may wish that you had been intentional about that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the most common lie that you see people telling about where healing comes from?
The lie, did you say? About where healing comes from? Well, I would say anything outside of yourself. We use things and people outside of ourselves. So, even talking about hypnotism, if you want to be hypnotized, if you want to experience hypnosis, it's very helpful to have a hypnotist, a skilled hypnotist with you. So there is a role for the healer, and there is even a time for Western medicine. I'm not like I definitely prefer alternative healing methods, but my daughter underwent a huge, very complicated surgery in December. And I was very grateful that we had that option, because I had tried a lot of energy modalities and alternative health things, and we just weren't able to get past what we needed to keep her healthy. And so I'm definitely not one of those like stay out of the doctor's office, stay out of the hospital, but the that handing over the power, I just had a healer. I think I was talking to Julie Ryan, who's a medium and a healer, and she was saying, even with the healing work that she does as a healer, she's like, I'm not healing these people. They're healing. You can tear your knee up and go to the hospital and the doctor can stitch you up, but they're not making your skin heal. So the healing is coming from within, but often, we are in a community, we are social beings, we are here all with our pieces of the puzzle to help each other. And so even though, the healing comes from within, truly, we do have, it's very valid to use people outside of you to help heal. But one thing that is interesting is there's this whole, Western medicine and energy healing, or Reiki, or even functional medicine. Even if you look from more of like the more mainstream, and you do like traditional doctor versus functional medicine, for example, or naturopath, or whatever, however we might look at it, I see the temptation, and I've experienced this some myself too, of rejecting the traditional and then just handing our power right over to the functional medicine group or whoever the other is. And a lot of functional medicine groups just, I don't want to pick on the same with veterinary medicine. There's this subscription model now. And so you can get into a lot of these alternative modalities, and it can add up. Financially, it can add up, especially if you're trying to treat something chronic. And it's just, we want to stay in our power and to stay aware from all sides. Just because we have been burned by one aspect of healing, we don't necessarily want to just then turn around and say like, okay, well now whatever you tell me to do, I'll do. And we're all busy, and we didn't all go to medical school and all of these things that we do need to rely on these specialists, but we can get into a situation where we've subscribed to pay hundreds of dollars a month, and paying through the nose for supplements and all of these treatments that are being recommended. And we just want to stay alert and recognize the potential for that to not always be in our best interest. So it's the same thing. Like in my book, I write about when I had a brush with a cult, and I, it was a short time, but really got into this group and the community, and really believed what they were saying. And then that crumbled, and a lot of us realized what was happening all at once. But a lot of people were then going, okay, well, now you've got to check this guy out. Because when you were in the cult, like you weren't supposed to listen to anybody else's teachings, classic cult, right? But then it was like, oh, now I've found the real teacher. This is the real one, So now it's like going from handing all of our power over to one group and then going, well, oh wait, that's not the right group. But how about this one? Now I'll do whatever you tell me to do, And and we don't also want, I was also saw people throwing, as you could say, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to be like, well, it's all a farce. None of it's true. I don't believe anything now. And I felt like that also was sort of, I can understand that rubber band, snapping in the other direction and needing that time to just detox and be like, no, I don't want any of it. But for me, it was a big lesson in how much I was handing over my power and trying to be cognizant of not carrying on that behavior with a new group.
Going along with that, was there any one particular pattern of behavior that was really keeping you stuck? And you just, as soon as it went away, like your life just changed?
It just generally, you mean, like in my own journey?
Yeah, if there's anything like that you would share.
Yeah. I think that a lot of, going back to that empowerment, what we were just talking about, I historically have been squash myself down to try to lift somebody else up. That, I don't know if that's a Midwestern thing, if that's a female thing, if it's just a human thing. But for I see people doing this a lot, and I know that I was doing this. So if anybody had like I can't think of a great example right now, but just, where it's, oh, you think that's bad, you should see my feet, or whatever it might be, where it's like, no, I'm worse at that, or I have it worse than that in some way. And it's the heart behind it is the like, no, you actually have it better than you think you do, because look at me. But there's this, there was definitely a pattern, and it did extend into like this, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not, I'm clueless, and somebody else is the authority, whatever it might be, whether it's in learning spiritual things or whether it's just in moving through life that way. And that was a pattern that I actively worked on. And I'm probably still working on that. Because, you can go too far and then you start getting like really egotistical and narcissistic and so forth. So there's always that balance of, humility, but sometimes there's the false humility. And I feel like that was a lot of what I was doing, and to my detriment of not stepping into a higher version of myself, because I kept telling this story, accentuating my flaws and my mistakes, and always deferring to somebody else. And that was something that I feel like, as I began to consciously release myself of those patterns, it did allow let's say like a higher version of myself to come in. That's more able to take up space, and to going back to that embodiment, kind of how we started the conversation, but allowing the truth to really flow in, because all of us are divine beings in these flesh and body costumes. And we really are divine, all of us. And it's false for us to not acknowledge that and to distort the truth of who we are. It doesn't mean that we're not making mistakes or that we won't make mistakes. But it means that we allow ourselves to really shine, and to do that unapologetically. And, even going back to the beliefs and allowing myself, one thing, it's kind of hard to see right now, but like I am not coloring my hair anymore. So I'm going to because I've been dyeing my hair brown as it's been turning gray. And I've been doing that for years and years and years. And it's like all of these things are sort of falling away, where it was like, actually, I'm really curious about what my hair looks like under that dye. And I want to embody that version of myself. And I don't mean to say that there's anything wrong with dyeing our hair or having any sort of expression that we want to have for ourselves, but it is this, like, that is me. That is me. I have gray hair, and that's another, like, I want to see what that looks like. I want to own it. And I want to also model for, younger women that there are other choices out there. We don't have to clutch onto our youth if we don't want to. We can do it however we want to do it. So
it's a wonderful thing. Trust me. People look at me all the time when they're like, "You're how old?" And I'm like, yeah.
You seem very young. I mean, well, you look very young. You don't seem young, but
yeah, I know. I get that a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, we know that everybody and their uncle has some kind of a spiritual business these days. They're trying to sell you something, a blueprint for this, a hack for that, a potion for this. How do you, I don't want to use the term hold space. How do you navigate that environment and keep things as sacred as they should be without being too woo-woo, or, just keeping it as practical and easy to understand? How do you do that?
It's another great question, because it is a dance. It's such a dance. And for me, it really is trying to keep things at a language that is more of an everyday language. But there also is, I do like to keep things very grounded, and I like to keep things accessible. But there also are these aspects to things where it's like, no matter what I do, I don't know that I can articulate properly in a simple way how powerful some things are. And what comes to mind when I'm talking about that is sacred geometry, because I'm not going to use the word obsessed with sacred geometry, but I do a lot of sacred geometry every day. I draw it, I look at it, I learn about it, and it's in my dreams. Like, even when I'm having a regular dream, I can tell that it's been happening on a pattern. Like, I'm in very narrow hallways, and there are, corners that are, and I can tell what I'm like, oh, I was in a Sri Yantra, or part of one anyway. Because I keep having these dreams of like really skinny hallways, long rooms, and it's like, and I'm drawing these lines and these angles like a lot. So it's bleeding in, but I'm having like a regular dream. There's a story to it and everything. So it's not like I'm dreaming of these shapes, but I can tell that my dream has the I can see what the architecture and the structure is of the dream. But it's just really funny, because it's really hard for me to express why I'm drawn to sacred geometry. And it always makes me laugh when I say drawn to sacred geometry, because it's a pun, but why I feel like I want to engage with sacred geometry, and then what I get from it, because we are all busy, and like you say, people kind of want to cut to the chase in modern life, don't you think? Like, we're so distracted, and we we're busy. We've got a lot going on, and our culture, at least the culture that you and I are in, it is busy. It's fast paced, and it's so it's hard. We're so entrained to just go and be productive, even in the spiritual community. I would not say that it's necessarily that different when you have a spiritual business, for example. But and so sacred geometry is something that you have to like take time out of being quote unquote productive. And it's similar with meditation. You take time away and then you do something that's not necessarily productive. But it is like a hack because it's like you do spend some time engaging in sacred geometry and it starts to change your consciousness. And I can't tell everybody what it's going to do for them. I just know what it does for me, and that it is like it's organizing my consciousness in a specific way that I feel intuitively guided that it's the right time for that to happen. And but there are things like that where it's like you can really, like when you start talking about sacred geometry, you start learning about it, it can be kind of complicated. You start talking about the Fibonacci sequence, the phi ratio, the golden ratio, which is also the golden ratio. You're talking about patterns and Greek philosophy, and there are a lot of different elements to it, and it's not simple, but it is too. You get into the Platonic solids and they're very simple, but they're foundational and they're complicated and they're fascinating. And so anyway, that's an example. I don't know that I'm really answering your question very well, but it's really like, but there is there's always a discernment. Sometimes you don't know if something is going to be a catalyst for you or not until you try it. I had this experience with I came across some mushroom essences that somebody just raved about. And I'm very into my dreams. I love getting symbols from my dreams. I love recalling my dreams and seeing patterns that are happening through my dreams. And somebody was talking about this specific mushroom essence and how their dreams just went off the charts, and they met this dream guide. And I was like, I want to do that. So I got this mushroom essence, and, I haven't really noticed anything with it. And so I had invested in this mushroom essence, and it just, it didn't hurt anything, but I didn't really notice anything. And I've taken it for, I think I did the whole moon cycle that I was supposed to do for it. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, I do genuinely believe the person who had the wonderful experience. And there was never any guarantee that I was going to have my socks blown off, and it just didn't work out for me. But I'm glad I tried it. And I don't feel that in particular was like I have had other things where I'm like, oh, that was like, what do you call that when that was snake oil? That was not what they sold, like what they were saying was going to happen. That was snake oil. This, I don't think I genuinely believe that it just is a unique experience. And it didn't work with my chemistry the same way, but some of these things you swing and you miss, and they're just not for you. And then other things, are amazing. And a lot of that, I trust the timing of things. When I hear about things, I don't try everything that I hear about, but a lot of times, like if I hear about things multiple times or the timing somehow lines up and it's like thematic with other things that are coming in or that I'm working on or whatever, those are usually signals. And of course, if I have like trusted resources that swear by them, then that means a lot to me too. And
right. So You don't want to tell us your secret. That's what you're telling me.
My secret, honestly, I can't say enough about sacred geometry, but I feel like it's not everybody's jam. But for me, it is, it has been, it has been a secret. Like there's a reason that this was so important to the Greek philosophers, and that it is time tested, and that, sages in the Himalayas, study the Sri Yantra mandala for, their whole life. There is a reason that people who go very, very far in expanding their consciousness that they use sacred geometry. My whole point is just like it just doesn't appeal to everybody, and it's hard to articulate because it's not a do this for 5 minutes every day and your blood pressure is going to do this. I feel like that's the society that we're in, where it's like, here's the research, here are the tangible results, here's exactly what you can expect. And it's much more mysterious than that. But these are, I think that there is consciousness in these geometries, and that they communicate and they become a part of us, and they help us to construct our reality. They help our reality to shift and to be in alignment. Is synchronicity. There's a word that we hear a lot in our community. And what is synchronicity? It is things repeating. It's things showing up, one thing kind of showing up multiple ways. And what is another word for that? It's a pattern. So like synchronicities, we accept, okay, the universe is talking to me. The universe is sending me signs because yesterday it did this, and then today this happened, and those things are related, and it's communicating. We get these communication, these signals, these understandings when synchronicities happen. They reinforce things. Those are patterns. What is sacred geometry? They are patterns. It is repetition. Sacred geometry is repeating angles, repeating shapes, repeating designs. It is that communication that we recognize with synchronicity. So it's a very, very powerful tool. But again, it's just one of those things. It's like right there. It's hiding in plain sight. If anybody who's had like a psilocybin experience or any sort of altered state of consciousness where your vision starts to change, because with psilocybin, like if you take mushrooms, it doesn't happen 100% of the time, but for a lot of people, their inner sight will open up while they're on that journey. And if you spend time in nature, you will start to notice all of these patterns and all of these connections and how things are related, and they're speaking to you. And it's kind of funny, it's like this whole joke of like, oh my God, it's around us all the time. And if you start to engage with sacred geometry, that's one of the things where it's like, oh my God, this is everywhere. It is the foundation upon which we are living. And so there's my secret.
Okay. So
very underwhelming, I guess.
Okay, so I keep a Sri Yantra in about every room that I am in the most, for all the reasons that you've said. I think, here's that year again, 2016, I got introduced to Marie Diamond and her brand of feng shui, and she was talking about the sacred geometry, and that was what really piqued my interest. And then, of course, there's that book by Hans Jenny that got me into the cymatics thing, and just contemplating in regular meditation these different shapes and how that all of that stuff works combined together really shifted my consciousness so quickly. So I keep that Sri Yantra, and I also have a flower of life in every room that I'm in a lot. And I found that at least those two things, I used to have a Merkaba as well, but it kind of fell off the wall and broke. But those things have helped me, especially in dream time, to decode a lot of different things. And so it's not like woo-woo nonsense that people might think it is. It's very useful. But it's about time to wrap up. So I'll ask you this. If there was one piece of insight that you could pass on to everyone out there who you know is a lot like your former self, what would it be?
Oh, great question. I would say just stay curious and allow that curiosity to guide you and take the pressure off, because it is a journey. I know, especially in the beginning, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I just wanted to be at the end. Like, I wanted to know everything. I wanted to understand everything in a new way. The beauty of it is the journey. It's the unfolding. It's that blossoming. It's the rose starting from a tight little bud that is unwinding in the sunlight. And it's a process, and it's a beautiful process. And I think it's a major part of why we choose to come here, why we as spirits choose to have this human experience, because we have this opportunity to have these heavy veils on us that make us think that reality is one thing. And then we have this empowering journey of blossoming and seeing new truths and to understand ourselves better. And so it's not about necessarily becoming enlightened, or whatever we would put as an endpoint, which, by the way, it doesn't end. It's ever expanding. The universe is ever expanding. But whatever we might think our end goal is, and let's just call that enlightenment, the journey is the gift. And so just do your best to enjoy that gift.
Awesome. So where can we find you?
I am at karagoodwin.com. And then my podcast is Soul Elevation. So you can get that to all my episodes at soulelevationpodcast.com. And then for social media, I'm most active on Instagram, which is Kara_Goodwin_meditation. And I spell Kara with a K.
Fantastic. Kara, thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. It is so important, and you're such a gentle guide through these conversations. So it's really fun to be here with you, and I thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality, whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms, or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
All the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our souls.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity Podcast.